If you felt drawn to this, there's a reason. Your energy is already waking up, and it's searching for something ancient. What you'll discover here isn't modern theory. It's a forgotten system, hidden in plain sight for centuries. The laws you're about to learn come from Magia Naturalis, a book once guarded by alchemists and seekers of true power. They knew, just as you do now, that nature doesn't just surround you, it speaks through you. And when you understand how to listen, everything changes. You were right to wonder. That feeling you've always had, that there's more to the wind than weather, more to the forest than trees, more to the silence between sounds. It meant something. You didn't imagine it. You noticed what most have forgotten to see, because nature has never been still, never passive, never out there. It breathes, it listens, it remembers. Long before we split the world into parts, body and soul, matter and spirit, human and wild, there was only one living thing, one vast, intelligent being. The ancient ones called it anima mundi, the soul of the world. Not poetry, not metaphor, reality. Before we dissected it, maybe you felt it before, though you didn't have a name for it, in the hush of a forest path that felt like it was watching you back, in the way animals sometimes seem to move in time with your breath, in the strange pull of a full moon that makes no logical sense but changes you anyway. That's not superstition, that's the current underneath the surface. Plato tried to explain it once in a tale called Timaeus. He spoke of a cosmos built by a divine mind, fashioned from reason, infused with life. He said the universe was a living creature with a soul and intelligence of its own, not created randomly, but formed according to a deep harmony, a sacred logic. Others came after him, quiet scholars, mystics, seekers, who felt that same truth stirring through the world. They became keepers of a hidden thread. You might hear them called hermeticists, though most never used that name for themselves. To them, the world was the body of spirit, made visible, and everything in it moved with meaning. There was once a man, an observer of storms, shadows, seeds, who spent his life listening to the patterns in nature. His name was Giambattista della Porta. He wasn't just a scientist or a mystic. He stood between worlds, watching how the visible echoed the invisible. And he said something simple, something that still echoes if you let it. Magic, he wrote, is nature itself in all its aspects. He was reminding us that magic is not about bending nature to your will. It's about aligning with her deeper movement, learning her rhythms, trusting that she knows what she's doing and that you are part of that knowing. Because nature is not just alive, she is intelligent, self-directed, a great weaver with a plan written in forces most have forgotten how to feel. And if you slow down, if you listen, you'll start to feel the pattern too. You've already felt it, that draw between certain people, that strange timing when something shows up just as you need it, that internal pull that says, go here, or don't trust that. That's not chance, that's nature's voice, speaking in the only way she can, through feeling, through rhythm, through resonance. The old ones believed there was a literal force of love that moved through nature, not poetic love, not sweet or soft, a force that attracts like iron to a magnet, like root to water, like planets caught in orbit, that pull you feel toward certain places, certain objects, even certain thoughts. It's real. It's energetic structure, not coincidence. Imagine nature as an enchanted tapestry. Every star, every stone, every blade of grass, stitched in with purpose, connected by threads. You cannot see threads of sympathy, of harmony, of deep recognition. This isn't fantasy. This is how the Renaissance magicians saw the world. To them, a plant wasn't just a plant. It was a note in a larger song, an expression of a deeper code. Nothing was random. Everything obeyed principles, some visible, most hidden. They called it lex naturae, the law of nature. Not the kind you read in a science book, but the law underneath the laws. The one that governs energy before it takes form. The law that explains why some things attract and others repel. Why a certain stone feels charged in your palm, or why the sound of a name can carry weight long after it's spoken. And once you begin to see that, once you remember that nature is not just around you, but alive with you, the whole world shifts. You stop trying to make things happen. You start learning how to listen. And when you do, something strange begins to reveal itself. You start to notice that certain things, objects, places, even animals, carry a kind of weight, not physical, but something else, something just behind the surface. You pick up a stone and it feels charged, almost watchful. You walk under a tree and feel your chest ease, as if the branches remember something you've forgotten. You step into a room and instantly know whether you're welcome or not. That knowing what you're sensing is real. It's what the old ones called virtus occulta, an occult virtue, a hidden force inside natural things, not magic tricks, not illusion. These were subtle, living powers tucked into the bones of the world, and they were everywhere. A leaf wasn't just a leaf. It had a shape, a color, a scent, a rhythm, and also a secret, a resonance, a kind of whisper. And that whisper could soothe or stir, protect or provoke, depending on how you met it. The Renaissance magicians believed every object held more than what the eye could see. They said the power in a thing was often small in amount, but immensely potent. The secret wasn't in size, it was in essence, like the tiniest seed holding the pattern of an entire tree, or the scent of a flower triggering a memory so deep it brings tears you can't explain. There was a man named Agrippa, part philosopher, part mystic, who spent his life tracing the hidden architecture of the world. He once wrote that occult virtues come from causes whose origins lie hid, and man's intellect cannot find them out. He wasn't being evasive, he was being honest. This wasn't knowledge to be dissected. It was something to be felt, remembered, intuited, something that asked for more than logic. It asked for trust. Those who worked with these forces, herbalists, alchemists, seers, they didn't see nature as a tool. They treated it like a language, or maybe more like a code, one you had to learn by listening, watching, being still enough to catch the way light moves through water, or how a root curls through stone. They noticed how a plant grew when it bloomed, what it grew beside. They studied not just the shape of things, but their gestures, their presence, and the world responded. The manuals they left behind read like dream books, now strange tales and impossible creatures. But if you read them with your body, not just your mind, something deeper unlocks. A salamander, they said, could survive in fire. A fish called echinacea could still a ship at sea. An ostrich could eat iron and live. There was a barren tree that calmed an angry bull. A hyena whose shadow could silence a barking dog. To us, maybe these sound like fables, but to those who walked the path before us, they were clues. Not because the world was full of monsters, but because It was full of meaning. They believed that nature revealed herself through marvels, that what seemed strange was not an error but a signal, a door opening to deeper laws. They called them sympathies and antipathies, hidden affinities, energies that reach for each other across distance, across form. Why some stones pull and others repel. Why certain herbs open the lungs or soothe the blood. It wasn't random, it was design, just not the kind you could see with ordinary eyes. This is where second sight was born, not from fantasy, from attention. The kind of seeing that happens when you stop naming things and start feeling them. When you stop asking what something does and start listening to what it wants. Because nothing in nature is silent. It just speaks in a language beneath the noise. And these virtues, these hidden forces, they were always there, nestled in bark, tucked inside minerals, coiled in scents, pressed between petals, waiting for someone who could feel their shape, someone who would treat them not as resources, but as messengers. You felt it, the way your body responds to certain places, the way one object seems to hum while another goes cold, the pull towards something you don't understand but know is meant for you. That's the language they followed. That's how they knew what to gather, what to burn, what to place beneath the tongue or under the moon. Because nature didn't just speak in whispers, it wrote in shapes. They called it the doctrine of signatures, the idea that every form, every pattern in nature was marked with a purpose, a kind of divine handwriting, not metaphor, but memory carved into matter. A leaf shaped like a lung, it eases breath. A walnut split down the center, its folds mirroring the human brain, good for calming the mind. These weren't coincidences, they were signs. Wounds in bark that mirrored wounds in flesh, roots that looked like bones and strengthened them. The shape of a thing, they believed, was the clue to its spirit. Paracelsus, a man who saw more in a single herb than most see in a lifetime, once said, "Nature marks each growth according to its curative benefit." He trusted what he saw, and what he saw was that the world had been left to us like a map, not one drawn with roads and borders, but one made of resemblance, echo, design. Della Porta tried to gather these clues into a single body of knowing. He wrote a book called Mnemonica, not a spell book, but a study, a record of patterns, of roots and stems, leaves and colors, placed side by side with the human body and its ailments. He was searching for the logic behind the living, for the blueprint behind the bloom. Because once you start to really look, you'll see it everywhere. The spiral of a sunflower is not random. The coil of a nautilus shell is not just pretty. They follow a number, a proportion, a secret rhythm the ancients knew by feel. What we now call Fibonacci, they felt as breath, as pulse. Petals form around invisible geometry. Seeds align with unseen order. Even the path of planets, the way they dance around the sun, is drawn by the same ratio that echoes in your bones. To the Renaissance mind, this wasn't theory, it was evidence that everything sky, root, skin, breath was made from the same code. That harmony wasn't decoration, it was instruction, a signpost, and underneath it all, something deeper. Affective structure. The truth that things don't just look similar, they move toward each other or away. That certain forces attract, others repel. That there is a pull to the world, a magnetic logic, a quiet gravity, not emotional, though you feel it that way, not scientific, though it governs science. It's the reason your body leans forward when something calls. The reason your hand hesitates before touching what looks harmless but hums with no. The magnet was their proof. They watched it draw iron across distance, invisible, undeniable. They didn't call it a field, they called it sympathy. A visible desire between two things, once connected, always drawn back. And that's how they worked. Not randomly, not with superstition, but with alignment. If you wanted to draw something in, you used its echo, its partner. If you wanted to heal, you chose what looked like the wound, but whole. If you wanted to influence a force, you didn't fight it. You mirrored it. Everything had its match, its moment, its correspondence. And so they arranged things with care. Laid stones beside organs, burned herbs under specific stars, placed metals near breath or blood, depending on what needed remembering. They followed the shapes because the shapes were instructions. Magic, to them, wasn't unnatural. It was ultra-natural. The geometry beneath the leaves, the architecture of what moves through you, the hidden scaffolding of the real. And when you learn to see it not with your eyes, but with your knowing, you begin to move through the world differently. You begin to remember where everything belongs, including you, because you were never separate from it. You are not outside the pattern. You are the pattern, folded in. The old magicians knew this. So did the midwives and mystics and watchers of the night sky. They saw your body, not as a shell or machine, but as a mirror, a scaled down echo of the cosmos itself. As above, so below, they said, not as poetry, but as law, as fact. Everything the heavens did, the body reflected. Every movement of the stars had its answer written in flesh. And so they mapped it. They looked at the arc of constellations across the sky and found their rhythm in the body's curve. Aries, fierce and bright, ruled the head, the rush of blood, the spark behind the eyes. Taurus grounded the neck and throat, steady and unmoving like stone. Gemini moved into the shoulders and lungs, breath flickering like twin winds. The zodiac became more than symbols. It was anatomy, living astrology. Cancer watched over the chest, the breasts, the tides of feeling and nourishment. Leo, the lion, held the heart and the spine radiant, fire-fed. Virgo traced the intestines, quiet, discerning, coiled with quiet intelligence. Libra balanced the kidneys, the lower back, the scales pivot. Scorpio curled into the reproductive organs, secret and intense. Sagittarius moved down into the thighs, the pathwalkers. Capricorn ruled the knees, the gatekeepers of humility. Aquarius ran through the calves and ankles, motion, disruption, water in air. Pisces ended at the feet, the dreamers, dissolving the body into sea. Each sign an element, each element a current in you. It wasn't metaphor, it was function. The way fire lives in the gaze, how the voice carries earth when the truth is spoken plainly. The lungs pull air, not just for breath, but for presence. The bloodstream moves like water through the terrain of your bones. And when one part faltered, they didn't just treat the organ, they read the sky. They looked for where the pattern was out of step, where a planet pulled too hard, where heat had gathered without release, where air had become too still to speak. It was medicine, and it was magic. Not the sleight of hand kind, the kind rooted in rhythm, in respect. They used the body like a weather map, tracking the rise and fall of the inner climate. Pulse was not just pulse, it was tide. Breath was not just breath, it was the wind inside the temple. They weren't the only ones who saw it this way. In alchemy, the heart was terra, the ground, the center, the place everything grows from or returns to. The lungs were air in motion, the music between worlds. The eyes held Ignis, fire, because they didn't just see, they lit. In Ayurveda, in Taoist medicine, in the shadowed halls of ancient Egypt everywhere, the body was understood as a small version of the world, a mirror that fogged when the truth dimmed, a compass when aligned. You feel this even now. You know when your fire is low, when your air is too scattered, when your ground shakes or your waters overflow. You've said it before without thinking. I feel ungrounded. My energy is off. I can't catch my breath. That's not metaphor. That's memory. That's your body trying to speak the old language. And once you remember how to hear it, you stop fighting it. You start working with it, because the body isn't just a vehicle. It's an engine, a receiver, a resonator. When tuned, it doesn't just survive, it harmonizes with earth, with air, with what moves above and what rises within. And that's where the real work begins, because flesh is only the first layer. What most people call a body is only the part they can see, the part that aches and hungers and sweats through the night. But you felt the rest. You've brushed against something just outside your skin, some invisible hum that stretches a little past your fingertips. You've walked into a room and felt the weight of someone's energy before they ever spoke. That isn't imagination. That's contact. The body extends. It breathes in layers. The ancients spoke of subtle bodies, not metaphors, not spiritual fantasies, but structures made of finer matter. The first is the etheric. It clings closest to the skin, wraps around you like mist wrapped in will. It breathes with you, sleeps with you, cracks when you lie, steadies when you walk in truth. It's the bridge between the seen and unseen, a sheath of vital force. Some called it prana, others pneuma, but the sensation is always the same, a living current feeding the flesh from the inside out. And it doesn't stop there. Beyond the etheric is the astral, softer, lighter, like breath made of feeling. You feel it when your chest tightens from someone's sorrow, or when the presence of a person fills the space like scent. It holds emotion like a sky, holds weather, sometimes clear, sometimes heavy. It's what drifts in dreams, what remembers a touch years after the body forgets. Then the mental body, sharper, brighter, sometimes blinding. It isn't thought the way we use the word now. It's will, focus, fire, the part of you that burns towards something even when you don't know why, the one that chooses. It's made of light, not logic. Each layer, each field, tied to an element. The etheric carries the weight of earth and the movement of water, holding form, keeping flow. The astral breathes air it stirs, lifts, scatters, sings, and the mental flares with fire, pure intensity, raw direction, a current that either burns or blesses depending on how you hold it. You've worked with these already, even if you didn't name them, when you breathe deep into your belly. Not the shallow chest breath, but the kind that drops into the ground. You're feeding your etheric body, stabilizing it, reminding your system that it is safe to root. That's not a relaxation trick. That's elemental medicine, air brought into earth. When you hum low in your chest or chant a tone that vibrates in your bones, you're stoking the fire in your mental layer. You're warming the field, pulling your spirit back into alignment. You've done it without knowing why, but your body remembered. And when your breath moves like a tide, slow, full, even you're weaving it all together. Earth, air, fire, water, every layer responding, every field settling back into its right place. That's not spiritual practice. That's tuning the instrument, because the body is an instrument, a finely strung, deeply responsive vibrating field of forces. And when it's out of tune, everything misfires, desire dims, clarity clouds, the world feels too loud. But when it's aligned, when the breath is steady, the posture alive, the voice clear, you don't have to try so hard to attract or protect or create. You become the magnet. You become the vessel. This is how they lived. The ones who came before, they didn't think of these things as mystical. They were necessary, like brushing teeth, like warming the hands. You tone the voice, not for sound, but for structure. You breathe, not just to live, but to live clean. You sit in stillness, not to escape, but to tune in, to listen to where the field has gone thin, or tangled, or burned too hot. They adjusted, recalibrated, daily, with gesture, with rhythm, with sound, because the energies around you are real, and your field is real. And when one learns to speak to the other, the world starts to listen back. But it listens through you, not just your breath, or your hands, or the rituals you perform. It listens through your face, through your presence, through what you carry without even knowing. There's something most people miss because they're too used to separating the inside from the outside. But the old practitioners didn't see it that way. They believed every feeling you've ever held is written somewhere on your body, not in scars or weight or posture alone, but in the soft geometry of your expression, the way your eyes hold light, the angle of your mouth, the way you walk into a room and change the air without saying a word. They called it physiognomy. The face is a map, a mirror of the soul, yes, but also of your elemental state. Fire too high and the eyes dart, the jaw locks, the cheeks flush. Water unbalanced and the face goes slack, dimmed, too porous. Earth out of place and the features tighten, harden, lose softness. Air scattered and you'll see it in the twitch, the glance that never lands, the breath that won't sit still. Porter once said that every vice, every emotion, every secret inclination shows itself, that you don't have to speak to reveal yourself. Your face does it for you, but it moves both ways. And this is where it gets powerful, because if your face tells the truth of what's within, then changing the outer expression can reshape the current underneath. A softened brow can signal peace to the heart. A lengthened spine can realign the will. The eyes, when focused not in tension, but in quiet alertness, can gather your scattered field. You've felt this. You've seen someone step into a new posture and become something else. You've done it yourself. Stood differently, breathed with purpose, and felt your whole self shift in response. This is not performance. This is participation. And one of the oldest tools for this kind of work was the mirror, not the kind hung for vanity, not the one cluttered with lights or dusted in fingerprints. I'm speaking of the mirror as threshold, a surface that doesn't just reflect skin, but field, a place where light and energy fold back on themselves. Women once stared into mirrors in silence, watching not their face, but the shadows behind the eyes. They weren't admiring, they were scrying, listening. In ritual, mirrors weren't accessories, they were instruments. A polished metal mirror could catch starlight like a bowl catches water. It could hold a gaze and return it charged. Magicians used them to amplify intent, to focus thought, to send something silent and unseen back out into the world with direction. Because the mirror doesn't just reflect you, it reflects the universe through you. That's what they believed, that the body, the full form, the aura, the expressions that rise without asking, wasn't just a vessel, it was the conduit, a bridge of flesh and breath and light, a listening post, a transmitter, a flame wrapped in clay. And so they moved with care. They breathed like it mattered. They spoke as if each sound shaped something. They held their bodies like sacred instruments, kept in tune by daily touch. The rituals weren't about control, they were about remembrance. Because when you remember that your blood runs with the same rhythm as rivers, that your eyes burn with a spark lit by the stars, that your breath moves tides of air you cannot see, you begin to understand. The body is not the end of magic, it is where it begins. And what moves through it, what supports it, surrounds it, strengthens it, has never been lifeless. Stones, metals, minerals, and they are not dead matter. They are slow fire, condensed breath, the solid echoes of something stellar. You can feel it if you hold them long enough. A pulse, a weight that's not just physical, a presence that isn't yours, but willing to listen. The old magicians knew this. They held gold, like sunlight held still. They wore silver, not for beauty, but to align the tides in the body with the tides in the sky. Each metal was born of a planet, shaped in its image, and when touched with intent, it remembered where it came from. Gold belonged to the sun, always has. It carries the clarity of light at its highest point, radiant, kingly, life-giving, not loud, not gaudy, just undeniable. Silver was the moon's reflection, cool, quiet, responsive. It didn't shine, it glowed, it calmed the blood, it softened the noise, it steadied dreams. Iron was forged under Mars. You could feel it in your teeth, weighty, raw, edged with heat, used for courage, for defense, for the kind of strength that breaks what would harm you. Copper belonged to Venus, warm, harmonic, open. It soothed, it healed, it brought beauty into alignment with balance. Tin carried Jupiter's breadth, prosperity, not as luck, but as expansion, the kind of wisdom that grows things. Mercury, fluid and strange, ruled its namesake, metal quicksilver, intelligence in motion, thought without form, dangerous if unanchored, but holy when aimed. And lead Saturn's child was the deep anchor, heavy as truth, slow as reckoning, used to hold things in place, to ground visions that flew too high, to teach patience, to mark time. They didn't just assign metals to planets and leave it there. They worked with them. They wore them when the stars aligned. They placed them on the body like keys in locks, each one opening or sealing something vital. Gold near the heart, silver at the wrist, iron along the spine or solar plexus when courage was needed, copper over the chest to mend what had been fractured by grief. And it wasn't just metals. Stones remembered too. Hematite was Mars, made solid iron's cousin, dark and blood-bound. You'd wear it for courage, for grounding, for protection, not to decorate the body, but to shield it. Lapis lazuli carried the wisdom of Saturn, deep blue, veined with gold, like the night sky speaking in script. It wasn't worn for status, it was worn to remember who you are under pressure. Turquoise, soft and sky-touched, was Venus's child, meant to soothe, to bring the heart back into rhythm with peace. The weight of a thing mattered. So did its sheen, its cut, its coolness or warmth against the skin. These weren't ornaments, they were allies, not symbolic, functional tools meant to harmonize your field with the greater field, your will, with the will of the heavens. When you wore them, you weren't accessorizing, you were aligning. When you touched them, In ritual, you were making contact, and they responded, still do, quietly, powerfully, always waiting for someone who knows how to speak the language of density, color, temperature, tone. And if you've ever felt drawn to a stone for no good reason, if you've ever picked up a piece of metal and just known it meant something, you were already speaking it. You didn't imagine it, you remembered, especially with the lodestone, that dark, unassuming stone that hums quietly in the hand. It doesn't glitter, doesn't shine, but if you hold it long enough, it starts to pull first your skin, then something deeper. There's a reason it was never treated like just another rock. The old ones called it proof, because the lodestone moves things. It doesn't pretend, it pulls. It calls iron to itself from across space, and in doing so, it reveals a law. Most people forget exists sympathy, hidden correspondence, the invisible thread between things that once knew each other and still remember. They believed it showed how the world really works, not through force, but through relation. One thing drawn to another, not by accident, but by design. Not everything could be explained, but the pull could be felt. And that was enough. Giambattista della Porta spent his life chasing this mystery. He saw the lodestone, not just as curiosity, but as key. He watched it dance between poles, push and pull, reverse itself, depending on its orientation. It behaved like it had a mind, like it knew who it wanted and when. He reversed poles in his experiments, placed stones in mirrored positions, studied what happened when they faced each other or turned away. To him, this wasn't mechanics. It was duality, alive in stone, polarity as an embodied law. He wasn't alone in believing it. Others wore rings, made from it not for fashion, but for draw, for pull, for the way it seemed to change the space around the wearer. There were whispers that sleeping with hematite, magnetized or not, could call love to your bed or keep it there. Not because the stone made someone fall, but because it aligned the field so that what you wanted could find you. The weight of the material mattered. The heavier the stone, the deeper the pull. Lead, iron, hematite, they grounded, they steadied, they held the body down when the mind wandered too far. Amber, light, and electric moved like breath in the field, lively, flickering, restless. Pumice floated on water, used when you needed to rise above something, to lighten your energy without losing it. But none of these worked just because they existed. They needed to be woken up. And that was the part most people missed. You couldn't just find a stone and expect it to know you. You had to introduce yourself. Let it feel your breath. Let it drink from something sacred. Some used oil pressed from herbs under moonlight. Some used water from springs or storms or melted snow. What mattered was the exchange. Others whispered into them, not words to command, but words to bond. A name, a prayer, a question, a truth. And then the sun or the moon left under sky, they changed. They warmed or cooled or deepened in shade. And somehow they listened differently after. Stones were alive, just slowly. You had to be patient to hear them speak. When the practitioner placed the stone, after all this on the altar, in the pouch, beside the bed, it wasn't just stone anymore. It had been touched, spoken to, filled. It had memory now. It had direction. That's how they used them. Not like accessories, like extensions, like limbs that reached where hands couldn't, carriers of will. Not because the stone had power, but because it agreed to hold yours. But intention was only part of the work. Placement mattered. Position was everything. They understood the body, not just as a vessel, but as a landscape of currents. Each center alive, with its own hunger, its own tone. So they didn't just carry the stones, they placed them like keys in locks. Iron was laid over the solar plexus when the spirit dimmed or the will was thin. That space, just below the ribs, was seen as the seat of self. When your boundaries wavered, when fear crept in, when anger turned cold, a disk of Mars-fed iron could steady the flame again, not because of superstition, but because the metal knew how to hold fire without burning. Clear quartz went to the forehead, right between the brows, where thought becomes vision. It was known to amplify whatever you gave it: clarity, confusion, direction, desire. That's why they called it the Master Stone, not because it ruled the others, but because it listened the best. You had to be honest with quartz. It didn't lie and wouldn't protect you from your own signal. Copper was worn over the chest, not for decoration, but because it remembered Venus. It knew the rhythm of the heart, the stretch of lungs, the slow ache of grief, and the bright pulse of joy. In potions, it softened edges. In metal, it warmed cold emotion. You'd wear it when healing had to begin from within. And for those who knew how to craft them, the stones became more than single tools. They became talismans, composed, timed, inscribed. They'd wait for the hour, the alignment, the sky's consent, then carve into the stone a sigil, a glyph, a name only they understood, not for others to see, not for beauty, for resonance. After that, the charging began. Some used the sun-hard light for strength, gold magic, heat-fed intentions. Others left their stones beneath the moon until they drank silver into their core. Elemental exposure changed the tone water for emotion, earth for stability, fire for transformation, air for insight. You didn't guess, you listened, and the stone told you when it was ready. And still, the breath they breathed into their tools, not to give them life, but to share it. They'd face the four winds north, east, south, west, and blow through the center of the piece like sending compass directions into its marrow. Or they'd whisper into the stone before sleep, planting words like seeds, burying dreams inside its core, then slide it under the pillow and wait. It wasn't superstition, it was relationship. Obsidian, dark and cold, pulled in what didn't belong, shielded quietly, soaked up what would otherwise find your skin. Quartz amplified, gold radiated, everything had a function, but none of them worked on their own. They waited for you, for your presence, for your readiness to engage, not as owner, but as partner. The old ones didn't collect these things. They worked with them. They made space for them. They treated each one as part of a field extensions of their own reach, expressions of intent in mineral form. With the right preparation, the right contact, the right timing, these weren't just objects, they became answers. And the same is true of plants, maybe even more so. Because where stone holds, plant moves, it breathes, it reaches, it listens in real time. There's something in green life that doesn't wait for permission. It seeks you out. It leans toward you. It has a will of its own, quiet but clear. The old ones didn't look at plants as decor or food or tools. They saw them as presences, not just alive, but aware. Each one carrying a specific spirit, a virtue, they called it. A kind of internal power you couldn't see, but could feel if you sat still long enough beside the right leaf. They believed these virtues were written on the body of the plant itself, not hidden, not metaphor written. Look closely and you'll see it. The heart-shaped leaves of ivy, not just beautiful, but meant to teach and open and bind the emotional body. The way fern grows like antlers from dark, damp places, its energy regenerative, ancient, returning life after decay. The red sap of arnica, or dragonwort, bleeding from the stalk like a wound that heals itself, used for fever, for injury, for anything that needed fire to burn through illness. This wasn't guesswork, it was reading. They called it the doctrine of signatures, the belief that the shape, color, scent, and feel of a plant reflected what it was meant to do. The cure was folded into the appearance. Nature had left clues written in green ink. Paracelsus said it simply: nature marks each growth according to its curative benefit. He meant that nothing was made randomly, that the healing use of a plant was not something we had to impose upon it. It was already there, waiting to be noticed. And if you didn't understand the chemistry, the compound, the Latin root, it didn't matter. What mattered was your ability to see with more than your eyes. Hildegard of Bingen called it viriditas, greenness, but not just color force, a divine push bursting through soil into form, the raw pulse of creation itself. She said every green thing carried the power of life within it, not just biologically, but spiritually. Plants were not objects in a system, they were messengers, carriers of the original breath. Her Physica was a book of plant knowledge, yes, but it was also a book of relationships. Each entry was a kind of conversation between the human body and the green one, between illness and the cure, between need and answer. Long before the laboratories, there were hands and eyes and memory. There was De Materia Medica Dioscorides, attempt to catalogue the earth's remedies. But even he, even then, knew this wasn't just medicine. This was something holy, something older than language, a list of spirits cloaked in stem and root. Later, Giambattista della Porta tried to make it more exact. His phytognomonica laid it out in patterns, how to read the lines, shapes, marks on leaves, to know what they were for. But even he knew you couldn't reduce a plant to a chart. The truth was felt first, then confirmed, always. You already do this, even if you don't name it. You've reached for peppermint when your stomach turned. You've lit sage when the air felt heavy. You've crushed lavender in your fingers just to calm your nerves. Those aren't superstitions, they're memory flickers, echoes. You were practicing high magic without realizing it, because every herb, every flower, every blade has a job. It's not random that chamomile softens the heart, that rosemary sharpens focus, that basil warms the blood. They don't just happen to help, they are made to. Each one is a living glyph etched into the world by intention. They grow not just where they thrive, but where they are needed. Walk through wild ground and notice what calls you. Plants show up for reasons, not always yours. Sometimes they grow to mend the land. Sometimes they grow because you'll need them next season. And they are listening. You can feel it when you speak to them, not out loud, but inside. They lean, they shift. Their field moves with yours. And when you start to engage, not as user, but as guest, something opens. The old traditions understood this. They didn't just harvest, they greeted. They offered thanks. They waited for the right phase of the moon. They watched the animals, not for superstition, for signs. If the crow circled, if the air stilled, if the bloom faced the wrong way, they waited or turned back. The power wasn't in the taking, it was in the relationship. Because a plant doesn't just give medicine, it is medicine. It doesn't just represent healing, it embodies it. You don't use it you work with it. Invite it into the field. Share space. Share breath. That's what they knew. That's what's been waiting for you to remember. That plants are not background. They're not ingredients. They're not scenery. They're beings, intermediaries, vessels of the divine logic of the earth. And when you approach them like that, with attention, respect, readiness, something real happens. Not a symbol, not a placebo, a pulse of life that meets you in the exact place where yours is fraying. And then, quietly, it begins to sow. But even a plant's deepest virtue must be called forward. You don't just cut a leaf and expect it to remember you. The bond begins before the blade, before the touch. It begins in how you approach. Renaissance practitioners understood this. They didn't just gather plants. They entered into ritual with them. Every harvest was a conversation. Every moment of contact had meaning. You'd rise early to meet the roses, just as the moon began to fade, but hadn't yet let go. A full moon still hanging in the morning sky. Timing that speaks of love, of pull, of things not yet resolved. If your work was for the heart, for opening, attracting, healing, you'd pick only then, and only with breath held, prayer whispered, or silence, if that's what the moment asked for. Mugwort was another thing entirely. You waited for a waxing moon when things were building vision, power, clarity. And if you saw crows circling the edge of a field as you approached, you listened. Their presence wasn't spooky, it was signal. You were in the right place. The energy was awake, the plant was listening. This is how they gathered, not by season alone, but by omen, by hour, by light. The moon's face mattered, the sky's mood, the movement of birds, and most of all, your own state. You couldn't just walk in heavy with distraction or demand. You had to arrive in a certain way, breath even, mind clear, or at least humbled. If you came frantic, the plants would resist. If you came clean, they leaned in. Prayer wasn't optional. It was attunement, not to convince the plant, but to shift you into presence. Once gathered, the work didn't stop. It changed shape. Some would breathe into the herbs, gently, slowly, just enough to carry a thought, a wish, an invitation into the leaf. Others whispered names into dried petals over many nights, letting the repetition deepen the bond. You'd place herbs under your pillow, not for scent, but for memory, for mingling. They called it dreaming with the herb. You weren't just using the plant, you were letting it meet you in the other world, letting its spirit show you something you couldn't yet see in waking light. Nettles, they said, spoke loud in dreams. Yarrow, more subtle. Mugwort, if you were ready, showed you where your vision had dulled. And when you woke, it wasn't always answers you found. Sometimes it was just an impression, a shift, the feeling that something had realigned just beneath the surface. They made oils like this too, by soaking leaves and petals under candlelight each hour, feeding the brew with intention. Others left the jars under moonlight, letting the celestial field charge the mixture. Not just water and flour, but now a liquid field, a carrier of resonance. The ways they used the plants were simple, but exact. Ash on the chest to draw out what had rooted in grief. Fresh leaves placed over the heart, not to cool it, but to listen to it. Necklaces of lavender and amber, worn during prayer, not for fragrance, but for purification. The stones held the structure, the herbs shifted the air. Smoke was breath made visible. Rosemary, cedar, bay. You'd let it curl around your face, your fingers, your spine, not to cleanse only, but to clarify. The body knew the difference between smoke and signal. This was the latter. They worked with plants like they worked with people, each one different, each one needing to be understood on its own terms. Mugwort and yarrow, especially, were the allies of the dreamers, those who walked the edge of vision. They opened what was closed, sharpened what was soft, brought light to the parts of you that had gone dim in the waking world, in deeper places under sacred trees, or in ceremonies far older than books. Plants like ayahuasca and soma were known as master teachers, not taken casually, not to escape, to see, to strip the mind of what was false and leave only what pulsed with truth. But even the gentler plants, the kitchen herbs, the hedgerow guardians carried that same power if awakened properly. And that awakening was done not by force, but by invitation, breath, moonlight, spoken word. These were the keys, the way you said the name, the way your fingers hovered before the touch, the way your breath lingered in the leaves. These things mattered, not symbolically, energetically. You weren't commanding, you were joining, aligning your field with the plants, opening the current between two living intelligences, one of blood, one of chlorophyll. Hildegard said it best: all green things carry the power of creation in them. They do not need your belief to work, but they respond to your reverence. You don't use a plant, you meet it, you honor it, and in return, it opens something in you that nothing else can. The same is true of sound. It's not a tool, not really. It's not something you fire off to get a result. It's something you enter, a living field, a current, a structure so ancient it moves through everything before thought can catch it. Giambattista della Porta knew this not just in theory, but in practice. He watched sound move, not metaphorically, physically. He strung two harps in the same room, tuned them identically, and plucked a string on one. The other vibrated. No one touched it. No one came near, but it answered, because it was listening, not with ears, but with form. He called it sympathy, not in the way we use that word now, but as a law of resonance. One string struck finds its twin, even in silence, even across space. Then he placed flutes in windows and let the wind play them. The air, he realized, didn't just move randomly. It could speak if it met the right structure. A current of breath became melody. Invisible became felt. That's the truth about air. It's never still, and when shaped right, it sings. He even worked with the deaf, not to cure them, but to reveal something. He built instruments that could be felt instead of heard, plucked strings, struck bells, and placed their vibrations against bone. They reported feeling music inside their skulls. He called it musical noise in the brain. That phrase stayed with him because it meant sound wasn't bound to ears. It was somatic, internal, felt as pressure, as tremor, as shifting awareness, which, of course, it always has been. The Neoplatonists believed the world was strung with a hidden thread, an invisible cord connecting all things, not metaphor, structure. If you touched one end, the other shivered. They said sound was how the universe spoke to itself. That a voice, when spoken with clarity, with charge, didn't just travel through the air. It touched the thread. It moved the whole. When you speak, when you hum, when you sing, you're not making noise. You're imprinting form into matter. You're shifting the field. Your body becomes a tuning fork, and your intention rides the wave. Pythagoras taught this long before theory gave it names. He measured strings, found the ratios, an octave, 1 to 2, a perfect fifth, 2 to 3. These weren't just sounds, they were structures. The same proportions echoed in the movements of the stars. He said the planets themselves sang but in tones too subtle for human ears. He called it the music of the spheres, a chorus so vast it shaped the world without anyone noticing. Plato took it deeper. He said the soul was made of these same harmonic ratios, that God, or whatever principle, breathed the first breath, tuned the human spirit like an instrument. That music, real music, isn't entertainment. It's reminder. It brings you back to what you were built from. It restores the original harmony. And somewhere along the way, someone called the universe an indestructible lyre. That image has never left me. A cosmic instrument, always vibrating, never breaking, even when the song feels far away. This is why sound matters. Why it has always mattered. It isn't decoration, it isn't filler, it's not something added on. It is the structure. When you speak, you leave a shape behind in the air. When you chant, you wrap your breath around intention and let it fly. When you hum or tone or whisper in the right way, you're not just expressing, you're building. You're calling things to you, pushing others away, drawing lines, opening doors. Every sound you make is a kind of spell, not because you believe in spells, but because the body doesn't wait for belief to act. It knows that sound is real, that vibration is the architecture beneath sensation. That tone is how matter remembers what to become. That's why you feel chills when a certain chord hits, why your body swells with feeling at a single sung word, why silence after a prayer holds more weight than the words themselves. Something moved, something shifted, not outside you, through you. And if you tune yourself carefully, if you shape the breath, set the tone, choose the sound with care, you don't just affect the air. You shift the field, you alter the weave, you reach back and pluck the thread, and something answers, because it always has. Long before we sang to be heard, we sang to become. The voice wasn't just a way to speak, it was a way to shape, and the ancients knew it. They didn't separate breath from meaning or tone from magic. They carried their prayers on air, like arrows. Sound wasn't decoration, it was a force. The Egyptians called it Heka, not magic, the way we say it now, but the primal power of word and will, fused by breath. To speak was to create, and every vowel they voiced was chosen like a key. They believed the breath of life, who lived in the mouth, and insight, Sia, in the heart. Put together, they formed the spell, breath with awareness, sound with intention. That was creation. 7 vowels, not letters, not grammotones, each aligned with a planet, a force, a presence. When priests stood in the inner chambers of the temple, they didn't recite, they sang. Long, stretched vowels held steady in the air, like threads pulled through time. The walls absorbed them, the floor vibrated, the air thickened. That was the point. You weren't just calling the gods, you were letting the sound become the god. They believed you could charge a space this way, purify it, or open it. There are still chambers that hold echoes in places where nothing has been sung in centuries. The stones remember, the sound lives on. In the Hebrew traditions, they didn't separate spirit and breath either. The word for both is the same ruach. When they spoke of the divine name, they meant more than syllables. They meant breath itself. Yod-He Vav-He, not spoken like a word, but breathed through the throat like wind between branches. The letters weren't just marks, they were elements. Aleph, Mem, Shin, fire, air, water, formed in the mouth. Each letter was a shape of spirit. The Sefer Yetzirah spoke of this, how the world was made not just by God's hand, but by God's voice. The breath carried the letters carried the form. So when the mystics chanted, they weren't praising, they were recreating. Every name spoken became a bridge. Every sound was an act of rebalancing the elements inside the body and around it. Chanting Adonai wasn't ritual, it was alignment. And in the stillness of early Christian tradition, there was hesychasm, the path of inner silence through the breath. The monks who practiced it didn't shout, they didn't preach. They sat in caves or small rooms and paired every inhale with one name, Lord Jesus Christ, and every exhale with a plea, have mercy on me, not out of guilt, but because that rhythm of speech and breath was a way to tune the soul, like tightening a string until it rang just right. They repeated it for hours, sometimes for days, until thought quieted, until heartbeat and chant became the same, until the sound inside them matched the one they believed filled the heavens, the eternal choir that never stopped singing. Even now, the echo remains in the long Alleluia, held on a single breath, in the Kyrie rising like incense, not performances, not performance, just tuning, bringing the human voice into harmony with something larger, something already singing. And all through magic, real magic, practiced in hidden places or written into old grimoires, you'll find the same instruction. Speak the names out loud. Adonai, Elohim, Iao, not whispered, not imagined, intoned, because it wasn't enough to write the word, you had to bring it into the air, give it body, hold the vibration in your own throat, so the field around you would take shape. The names weren't passwords, they were tones. They had to vibrate in the bones. IAO, especially, a formula of rising and falling energy. Isis, Apophis, Osiris, life, death, rebirth, said right. It didn't sound like language, it sounded like force. The lesser key of Solomon was precise about this. If you wanted the ritual to work, you had to speak loudly, clearly, with breath. The spirits didn't respond to thought alone. They answered to sound, to structure, to rhythm. They moved in fields shaped by frequency. You made the field. The name opened the door. And still, across all of this Egypt, Israel, Byzantium, the grimoire traditions, the core truth never changed. Sacred tones imprint. They press your will into the air, into the room, into the substance of what surrounds you. They don't vanish, they ripple, they remain. You felt it. You've walked into a space where someone had been praying, or chanting, or crying, and something was still there, lingering, not memory, tone. The field had been changed by sound. That's why voice matters. That's why breath matters. It isn't for communication, it's for creation. It always was. You felt it in that one breath before something shifts. In the way the air feels when you walk into a room that's just been prayed in the moment your chest softens, not because anything outside changed, but because something inside did. Breath is not just air, it's interface. It's the oldest agreement between body and spirit. The Stoics called it pneuma, not just wind, but the living breath that connects all things. A kind of invisible thread moving through matter, thought, form. Renaissance alchemists had their own word, spiritus, the subtle, vital essence extracted not from the lungs, but from the weave of the world itself. Even the Hebrew root, neshima, breath, carries neshama, soul, inside it. You breathe, therefore you are alive with something more. And once you start treating breath like that, as a sacred act, not a survival reflex, everything else changes. Take the 4-count breath. It sounds simple. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, Breathe out for 4. Hold again, but what it does is not simple. That cycle begins to shape the energy around you. Inhale, and you draw the field in close. Exhale, and you push it out like a glow, like a second skin. You can feel it after a while, like warmth or pressure or quiet. Where there was once noise, now add a symbol. Imagine a pentagram drawn in front of you with the breath, or draw it physically if you need to. Inhale through your nose as your hand lifts. Exhale as your fingers pull the line down through air. That line means something now. It holds breath, intention, geometry. The room is different. You made it different. You can whisper into it. You can chant over it. You can fill it with a name. This is where sound returns. Not sound for noise, but for charge. Say a word with no breath behind it, and it falls flat. But take one sacred name, an angel, a principle, even your own name. If you speak it from a deep place and exhale it like fire, that name becomes presence. It coats the space. It sticks to the walls. It folds into the air and changes the tone of the room. One breath, one sound, done with clarity, is more powerful than pages of scattered intention. You can use this with cycles. Whisper an incantation on each exhale. Time your silence to the still pause after the breath leaves you. Let your inhale pull energy in. Let your exhale write it into the air. If you do this long enough, you'll feel the atmosphere shift almost like wind, but from the inside out. The vowels are oldest. Pythagoras worked with them at dawn. Each vowel sound sung into the rising sun to bring the body into rhythm with the sky. It wasn't music, it was tuning. The Rosicrucians kept that thread. So did Steiner. Vowels, scales, not to perform, but to align the soul. Renaissance magicians had their own code. They mapped vowels to planets. A for the sun, E for Mercury, I for Jupiter, OU for Saturn. When chanted, these weren't phonetics, they were keys. Each one unlocked a certain part of the field. A note struck against the fabric of the subtle world. You choose the sound depending on what you needed to open or what you needed to burn away. Modern mystics kept it. Om, IAO, not words, seed sounds, small carriers of light embedded in breath, spoken slowly with intention. They reshape your inner landscape. They don't do the work for you. They show you how to do it from the inside. Every system kept some part of this. The Sufis with Dhikr, the breath-driven remembrance that threads each name of God into the heart until you don't know where you end and the name begins. The Tibetans with Tamo, the blessed breath that ignites fire in the belly and melts fear into warmth. Crowley had Liber Samek. Steiner had Eurythmy. Folk magicians had their own breath spells, exhaling across a talisman to charge it, breathing softly into a bowl of water before scrying. It all comes back to one truth. Breath is fuel. Sound is direction. Put them together and they shape the field. That's the magician's real wand. Not wood or metal. It's the breath in the chest, the voice in the throat. The one that knows how to hold a name in silence and then speak it like a flame. The one that doesn't just talk about change. It becomes the wind that moves it. But wind alone doesn't burn. It needs something to catch. Something that turns breath into blaze. That's fire. Not the kind in stoves or cities, but the deeper one. The one behind the eyes when you speak your name with certainty. The one in the chest when you're willing to be changed, no matter the cost. That's the fire magicians followed. They didn't call it metaphor. They didn't call it symbol. They called it spirit. In the old books, it's ignis, the animating charge inside all matter. Not a thing you see, but the reason anything moves at all. They believed that everything had it, but fire showed it best. It danced, it consumed, it transformed. It didn't just mark the beginning of ritual, it was the ritual. In alchemy, this wasn't poetry, it was law. Fire was how you moved lead toward gold, not just in metal, but in being. The spark they called sulfur, the thing that stays when everything else falls away. The divine particle that survives the burning and comes out cleaner, brighter, closer to itself. And they knew it wasn't mindless. The ancients spoke of salamanders, not the animal, the spirit, the thing inside the flame that watched you, that answered when you called it right. Paracelsus taught that fire had presence, a kind of intelligence. It responded, it tested you, it burned away lies. That's why so many rituals required flame, not just for heat or light, but because something in that flicker was alive and you had to face it. Other cultures knew the same truth in different names. The Zoroastrians kept fire as a god's face. Atar, the visible breath of Ahura Mazda. They didn't worship the flame, they guarded it. The Romans built their city around one, the Vestal flame, tended day and night by priestesses. If it died, they believed, the soul of the city died too. Hindus call it Agni, the divine guest at every altar. Brigid, in the Celtic world, lit hearths and hearts alike. You can find it everywhere, in oil lamps, in bonfires, in candles, carried through silent streets. Even in stories like the one that begins with God saying, "Let there be light." To make fire is to echo that first word. The act itself is declaration. I exist and I bring light. The Stoics had their own way of saying it. They spoke of pneuma, the warm, glowing breath that held the cosmos together. They said it was fire too, not the kind that devours, but the one that animates. The thing that breathes through wood and blood and stone. Fire was never just combustion, it was connection. That's why it wasn't enough to light a flame and walk away. In the old homes and the old temples, fire was kept alive, not for comfort, but because it meant something was still awake. Something was still listening. And when you stood near it, when you let it speak, before you spoke, you weren't just warming your hands. You were reaching for the oldest language, the one that knows how to turn will into reality, the one that still answers to flame. You don't need a temple to find it, just a match, a moment, and a reason. That's why the candle was never just wax and wick. It was always an altar in miniature, a point of contact, a way to speak without words, and it mattered what you lit. That was something the old magicians understood with bone-deep clarity. Every color held a charge, every scent a signal. The candle wasn't chosen by chance, it was tuned like a string. Red didn't just mean heat, it meant Mars, it meant blood, war, courage, lust, the kind of force that broke down walls or burned through fear. Green was softer, slower, Venus, growth, beauty, breath between storms. It belonged in healing work, fertility prayers, the kind of magic that mends instead of fights. Yellow fed the mind, clarity, focus, air, catching fire. Blue cooled the nervous system, good for wounds that didn't show on skin. And white was what you lit when you didn't know what else to light. Purity, peace, a clean frequency that carried anything you whispered into it. You didn't just place the candle, you dressed it. Oils mattered too. They weren't perfume, they were invitations. Mars oil for firepower, rosemary for love, memory, protection. Every drop a small signature. You anointed the wax-like skin, sometimes with fingers, sometimes with a brush of leaves, sometimes with a breath that trembled. And if you were careful, if your hands didn't rush and your mind stayed clear, you take a pin or a stylus and carve your need into the candle's side. A sigil, a name, a word you couldn't say aloud yet. Something sacred, something sharp, something yours. Then came the moment. You struck the match. You watched the thread of flame find its path. You felt the room shift not because of heat, but because something had answered. Again, you gazed into the flame, not as a distraction, but as a doorway, not a trance, an attunement. If the candle was blue, you felt the flicker in your throat. If it was red, you might feel it lower in the gut. The color wasn't visual only, it was vibrational. It fed a frequency that needed feeding. Some called it chromotherapy. Some didn't call it anything at all. They just lit the candle and breathed, focused, watched the light grow steadier, watched themselves grow steadier with it. Because that's what flame does when it's listened to. It steadies, it amplifies, it sings back. And in that small ritual, if you did it with presence, with clarity, you'd feel how the flame didn't just reflect your will, it carried it outward like a message in light, a flare to whatever watched from beyond the veil. The setup didn't need to be elaborate. One candle, one breath, one line, spoken aloud with honesty. Let this be received. That was enough. The rest was listening, holding the gaze, feeling how the flicker shaped the field around you. The candle doesn't just sit there, it receives, it speaks, it anchors and expands. And you realize you're not watching a flame, you're watching your will take form. And then if your eyes don't look away, you'll notice something else. The flame begins to answer back. There's a reason the old ones feared the eye, called it dangerous, said it could bless or curse or kill a crop just by watching it. They weren't wrong. The gaze carries charge. It projects, it marks, it moves. They named it across languages, Malocchio, Matanya, the evil eye. But it wasn't just evil they were describing. It was power without guidance, will without aim, a fire sent out through the eyes without knowing what it would touch. Because the gaze doesn't just see, it impresses, it declares. You look at something long enough, with enough fire in your spirit, and something shifts. That's not metaphor. That's pressure. Even the faithful understood this. In the old Orthodox rite, there's a prayer where the priest touches your eyes. Ephatha, he says, be opened not to the world, but to the divine. Sight as invocation, gaze as gateway. In magic, it's the same. You train your gaze to hold fire, to carry intention. You focus not to control, but to burn clear. The practice has a name in yogic work, trataka, fixed gaze, usually on a candle, though some use a star, a crystal, or the flame behind their closed eyes. The point isn't what you see, it's what gets activated when you stop blinking, when your eyes quiet and your breath follows, when time thins and the afterimage begins to rise behind your lids like a second sun. The old texts say those images mean something, that when the flame marks the back of your eye, it's marking something deeper too, that the inner world starts to listen once the outer one is quieted. You look, you soften, you allow, and in that stillness, the gaze becomes a kind of branding iron, one you wield with care, because whatever you look at that way, with will, with presence, with feeling, it carries your imprint. It doesn't stop there. The gaze doesn't just go outward, it reflects, which is why mirrors matter. Ask anyone who's grown up around folk magic. There are stories, mirrors hung by the door to bounce back the evil eye. Mirrors turned face down when someone dies. Mirrors wrapped in cloth during storms. Not superstition, precaution, because the mirror doesn't just show what's there, it throws it back. That's why, in some rituals, you place a mirror behind the flame. Not for beauty, for multiplication, to double the light, to send it outward in more directions, to create a field that says, this is protected, this is chosen, this is lit. The mirror makes the flame look infinite, and the mind believes what it sees. There's a ritual for this. It begins before dawn, while the dark still breathes. You face the east, light 7 candles, each for a planet, each with its own color and oil. Red for Mars, blue for Jupiter, gold for the sun, the whole sky, anchored in wax and wick. You strike the first flame with flint and steel. No lighters, no shortcuts. Air made to ignite matter. Hands making fire the old way. Then you sit. You cup your hands near the central flame, not touching, just close enough to feel the heat. Your eyes lock into the center. No blinking, no words. You breathe. 4-count rhythm. Inhale. Draw the fire in. Hold. Let it fill. Exhale. Send it outward like a beam through the ribs. Again and again until you can feel your skin humming. With each breath, you say a name, a divine one, a word that calls back what you forgot you were capable of. IAO, Shekinah, Elohim. Doesn't matter which, so long as you mean it. Sound rides breath. It strikes the flame. It leaves through the gaze. At the end, you speak your final line, the thing that called you to the fire in the first place. Let this flame carry my will to name it. Dissolve every wall in the way. Then you let it burn, and the mirror behind it catches the glow, doubles it, sends it further than you could with voice alone. Because fire listens, flame listens. The eye that doesn't waver becomes a signal, a prayer, a spell, a command. And what begins in light does not end in silence. That's what a mirror teaches, if you know how to listen. If you've ever locked eyes with yourself in one, not a glance, not a flicker, but the kind of stare that softens into something deeper, you've felt it. That strange thinning of the world, the hush that rises. Not absence, but invitation. Something opening. The mirror has always been more than reflection. In the old mysteries, it was a threshold, a place where form met formlessness, and each became visible through the other. The Hermeticists called it the speculum veritatis, the mirror of truth. Not because it showed you what was, but because it dared to show you what you were not yet ready to see. Alchemists held it as sacred. The glass, the metal, the polished obsidian, each was a vessel that caught the ideal behind the image. Not just a tool, a partner in revelation. A silent eye that didn't just observe, but echoed. In the Kabbalistic texts, the Shekinah, the indwelling feminine presence of God, is described as a mirror, a spaklaria, the lens through which divinity becomes perceptible. The sages said there were two kinds, the clear mirror and the dim one. One showed truth as it is, the other, cloaked and shadowed, offered riddles, dreams, symbols. Both were holy. Both had their place. Mirrors never give back exactly what they take in. They fracture, multiply, distort, but they do it with purpose. Just like thought, just like memory. That's why mystics used them. That's why candles were placed before them. in hidden sanctuaries, their flames doubling in the glass, not just for light, for force. A candle in a mirror is not one flame, it's many. The energy folds back on itself, doubling as it burns, like breath hitting breath in a chant. Modern eyes call it art. The grove of mirrors hung in concentric spirals by Hilary Arnold Baker, where the viewer becomes a dozen shifting selves, flickering in and out of each other. But the magicians already knew this. The mirror is never still. It moves with the mind that meets it. In Jewish tradition, you cover mirrors when someone dies, not from superstition, but because a mirror still holds presence. In the silence after death, it becomes too thin, too open. The dead could look back, so you veil the gateway. You quiet the channel. You give the soul room to pass cleanly. Other customs see the mirror as protective. In Moroccan Jewish weddings, polished metal was cast into mikvahs or held near the bride's head, not for beauty, but for blessing, to reflect what should be seen, to shield what should not. In occult practice, mirrors are not passive. They focus, they send, they gather light, and bend it not just to illuminate a face, but to shape a field. That's why they were set behind elixirs on altars or beneath talismans, to echo intent, to reinforce what was being made. And sometimes they weren't used to see anything at all, but to call something forth. The old North African mystics practiced istinzal, pulling down visions through burnished brass or darkened silver, not scrying, not guessing, but inviting the deeper sight. A still gaze into the softened shine, letting it blur, letting the self dissolve. And then something arrived, not an image, but a knowing, a shape behind the shape, a voice without sound, because the mirror doesn't just show your face, it shows your echo in light, your echo in will. And when you're quiet enough, steady enough, that echo starts to answer, not with words, but with vision. You don't always recognize it right away. Sometimes it's just a soft blur around your shoulders, like your outline is breathing. Other times, your face starts to shift just slightly, like someone else is wearing it for a moment. It doesn't feel frightening, it feels honest, like some version of you, older, maybe, truer, has been watching from just beneath the skin. And finally, it's allowed to rise. The mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't flatter either. What it shows is what you carry, the sharpness, the tiredness, the hope you've been afraid to name. You can't smile your way out of it. You can't pose. The light catches all of it, even the things you forgot to bring into the room. What most people call aura is just the skin the soul wears when it's trying to speak without language. You can feel it before you see it, but mirrors used right can make it visible. Not like a halo, not like some fantasy painting, just a soft field, a shimmer, a shift in temperature. Behind the glass, you lean in and it leans back. There was a time around the early 1900s when mystics started doing something strange. They would sit with a mirror, small, close, no makeup, no light tricks. They wouldn't try to look for anything. That was the key. No agenda, just gaze, just stay. And after a while, their faces would begin to change. It wasn't hallucination. It wasn't wishful thinking. It was contact, not with spirits, with archetypes, with the parts of themselves that don't get called by name during the day. Sometimes the cheekbones would shift, the mouth would soften or narrow. Some saw teachers, others saw ancestors. Some just cried without knowing why. The image fades, but the feeling stays, like something recognized you before you could recognize yourself. The science called it the Troxler effect. how stillness makes the edges of a thing melt. But that's just a name for what the mystics already knew. When the eyes go quiet, the veil goes thin. Mirrors change the field because mirrors change the mind. You don't have to believe in energy to feel it. Just look at yourself the way you'd look at someone you loved every day, same time, same mirror. The face changes, not because it's fake, but because the gaze is no longer passive. You are shaping what looks back. That's how it starts to shift. That's how it begins to feed something real. Temples have always used mirrors, even when they didn't call them that. Polished bronze, obsidian, silver bowls filled with still water, always behind the flame, always placed just so. Because when light meets reflection, it grows. A single candle, doubled, becomes 4. Add a breath, a prayer, a focused name, and you've got a current. You become part of the current when you see yourself in it. That's the secret. Seeing changes being. If you watch yourself cast a spell, the spell roots deeper. If you see your hands bless the water listens more. Ritual is just a conversation with matter. Mirrors remind you that matter is already watching, and what you reflect becomes what you carry. What you carry becomes what you emit, and what you emit answers. That's why the mirror isn't just for seeing, it's for setting, for tuning, for remembering who you are before the noise comes in. The best time to do it is when the sky is still soft. Dawn if you want to fill, dusk if you need to empty. Sit where the light can reach the mirror. Let it hit the glass, let it touch your face. Gold at sunrise, indigo at night. It changes the field. It teaches your skin a new tone. Keep it simple. A hand mirror, a quiet room. Nothing else needs to happen. Just sit. Just look. Not the way you normally do. Not to check or adjust or correct. Just look. Direct. Still into your own eyes. There's a moment, if you stay with it, where the mirror stops showing you the surface and starts showing you the signal. That thing under the breath, under the bones, under the habits. The thing that still remembers what you came here to do. Say the name then, out loud. Not like a password, like a key. One word that holds your center. Maybe it's Tiferet. Maybe it's Hezed. Maybe it's the name you only whisper when you're lost. Say it on the exhale. Let it ride your breath into the mirror. Watch it soften the line between you and your reflection. Watch it return. Now, speak what you want to become. Soft but steady. Into your own eyes, into the light. I reflect divine harmony. My light is clear and complete. I am the mirror of the divine will. Not mantras, not spells, agreements claimed in stillness. Spoken to the part of you that already knows how to listen. Each time you do this, it rewires something. You're teaching your energy field how to shape itself. Teaching it how to respond to your own direction. What you feed into the mirror starts showing up in the mirror, not as fantasy, as pattern, as tone, as alignment. You can build on it. Place a small mirror behind a candle and let the flame double. Watch how the room changes when you say your name into that space. Or keep a mirror facing the door to your ritual space. It doesn't just reflect, it sends back. It catches what doesn't belong. It holds the shape of your field even after you leave. The mirror is more than glass, more than surface. It's a hinge between vision and form, a feedback loop for identity, a witness that never blinks. You're not looking at a thing, you're speaking to a presence, one made of light and timing and will. And if you treat it with respect, it begins to remember you. It begins to carry you until one day you speak and the whole room answers back in kind. That's magnetism, not the metaphor, not the charm you throw around to get someone to like you. I'm talking about the real thing, the current that hums through your skin when your body, your focus, your breath, your belief are all aimed in the same direction. They used to call it animal magnetism, not because it was wild, because it was alive. Mesmer said it moved like a fluid, like an invisible river stretched between your hands and the world, carrying feeling the way a wire carries charge. A field you couldn't see, but everyone could feel. Not belief, not mood substance, a radiant body that leaked out of you in waves and wrapped itself around everything you touched. He wasn't alone. Paracelsus called it the sidereal current, born from the stars, anchored in the soul. He believed we weren't just men and women. We were homo sidereus, star beings whose breath still echoed with the movements of the heavens. The imagination, to him, wasn't idle. It was causal. It sent sparks out into the field, and the field answered. He meant that literally, that's why focus mattered, why stillness mattered. Because if you wanted to conduct it, really move that current, you had to become the wire. One clean thought, one clear signal. Any confusion would scatter it. And when Mesmer worked, people didn't just feel better. They convulsed, they wept, they spoke in tongues. He would pass his hands slowly over their bodies, never quite touching. Sometimes he pressed a thumb to the wrist, sometimes to the temple, and the current would find a way through. They said his gaze alone could move something in you, like a magnet to blood. He built great tubs, lined with iron rods and silk cords, each one designed to conduct that fluid more cleanly, more completely. They were called backheads. The people would sit in a circle, hands linked, knees touching. The lights would dim, and something would start to stir. Some said it was trance. Others called it hysteria. But the truth is simpler than that. It was flow, blockage, breaking, a current returning to itself. Faith was part of it, yes, but not the kind you pray with. Faith like voltage, faith like heat, a directed, sharpened trust in your own capacity to emit. Mesmer knew that. So did Paracelsus. They used their bodies like tools, gesture, breath, presence, pressure, even stillness, each one designed to move energy from the hidden to the seen. And what they proved again and again is that energy doesn't follow effort, it follows alignment. It doesn't rush toward noise, it answers stillness, precision, rhythm, like iron drawn to the hand that knows it's already magnetic. That field is in you too. It always has been. The difference is whether it flickers or shines. Radiance isn't poetry. It's not a compliment, it's a function. Something real that burns through the space around you, whether you mean it to or not. Agrippa didn't speak of charisma as charm. He spoke of it as consequence, a byproduct of coherence. When your thoughts, your emotions, your posture, and your presence move in the same direction, then what you are begins to leak out into the air. Paracelsus wrote that the soul radiates power when it's in harmony with itself. That imagination, when unbroken, becomes force. That you could strike the world without ever lifting your hand if your spirit was sharp enough. But you can't project what you haven't built. You can't radiate what you haven't kindled. It starts in the body. Posture first. You sit or stand, not stiff, but upright, balanced, like your spine is a wick, like something in you could catch fire if you held still long enough. Let your breath drop deep down into the belly. Let it expand. Let it root. Inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. Slowly, not dramatically, just rhythmically, as if every breath is priming something ancient. With each inhale, imagine gold, not just light heat, pressure, something thick, gathering just below your ribs, coiling in the chest or solar plexus. And when you exhale, imagine it pushing outward, not like steam, but like the sun. Do it again and again, until you feel the air around you change. And when it does, don't waste it. Find something to focus on. A candle, a sigil, a face, anything that matters. Soften your gaze and let the light you've built collect behind your eyes. Let it gather there, behind the stillness, until your sight is no longer just watching, it's touching. That's projection. Not shouting, not showing, just presence, charged and directional. You'll know when it happens. You'll feel the current catch, like something moving from your center, through your eyes, through your hands, out into the world, like the air itself is holding your shape. Paracelsus said the power of imagination reaches as far as thought can go. Mesmer proved it with every hand that trembled under his, with every person whose breath caught the second he walked in the room. It's not new, it's not fancy, it's old magic, quiet magic, held in every breath, every gaze, every spine that stood tall with purpose. You don't need permission to shine, but you do need discipline, because this kind of light doesn't come from wanting. It comes from wiring the body to burn, and then tuning that burn to match the thing you seek. That's the heart of it. Resonance, not force, not conquest. Alignment. Like attracts like. It's not metaphor, it's a law. One of the oldest. One that doesn't bend when begged. It moves when matched. When the tone of your field hums in sync with the thing you name, that's when it shows up. Della Porta knew this. Said everybody seeks what it mirrors. Said nature itself moves by sympathy, wood to fire, iron to magnet, heart to heart. He wasn't being poetic. He meant it like gravity. It's why the lodestone was sacred, because it pulled without touching. It drew iron to itself simply by being what it was. And the old magicians saw that and understood they too could become lodestones if they could find the right frequency and hold it steady. So they practiced mirroring. You see it in the little things, like choosing a stone or herb that feels like the thing you want, not for tradition's sake, but because it rings. You light a pink candle, not because the book said so, but because love feels warm, soft, tender, like rose, like skin, like flame with its edges rounded. That's not superstition. That's matching frequencies. Mesmer knew it too. The silk, the water, the low light, the metal rods, none of it random. Everything selected for tone, for feel, for the current it created in the room. His chambers were orchestras of sensation, subtle, specific, charged. Every texture, every scent, every flicker of reflection, adding to the field until bodies began to hum with it. That's sympathy, that's magic that doesn't push, it draws. There are stories, you know, like Van Helmont's The Mother, who craved cherries so deeply, so obsessively, her child was born with the shape of one on her skin. That's imprint. That's how deep intention can stain the body, how image becomes biology. Paracelsus saw it too. His cures weren't just chemical, they were symbolic. A plant that looks like the wound heals the wound. A shape that mirrors the pain clears the pain. He treated resonance as medicine, and when the healer wanted to call vitality, they sat in green light. When they wanted love, they covered the altar in roses. The magician becomes the echo of the thing they summon. Their body, their breath, their room, All of it shifts until the field is singing the same song as the goal. You want change, become the tone of it. Before ritual, surround yourself with it. Color, scent, sound, texture, anything that holds the feeling of what you seek. Then breathe it into your skin. Speak it into the mirror. Wrap it around your field like a second skin until your aura is no longer asking, it's remembering. That's how attraction works here. Not chasing ever. Just tuning, just humming, just holding the note until something starts to move toward you. That's the secret. The power isn't in the force, it's in the frequency. Lumen sequitur naturam. Light follows nature, and everything else follows the light. That's what they meant when they said, as above, so below. Not a metaphor, not a poetic echo, a law, a mirror, one world folding into another perfectly. The breath in your chest, drawn down from the stars. The metals in your blood humming with the same tones that guide planets. You don't need to believe it. You only need to notice what happens when you act like it's true. The Renaissance magicians didn't cast spells to force the world to bend. They built rituals like instruments, tuned them to the sky, to the season, to the hour, and then struck a chord. That was their magic. Harmony, alignment, getting your inner frequency to hum so close to the thing you're calling that it doesn't know how not to answer. They called it correspondence, but it was more than analogy. It was structure. Every color, every herb, every metal, every day of the week, all mapped, all humming in patterns that repeat in the body and in the heavens. It wasn't random. Tin wasn't just a metal, it was Jupiter's voice. Basil wasn't just a plant, it was a green breath of expansion. Emerald, thunder, oak, trees, frankincense, they all lived on the same octave. If you wanted to call Jupiter, you called all of him at once. Agrippa laid it bare. Mars is iron, fire, nettle, blood. Venus is copper, roses, honey, rhythm. The Picatrix went further, weaving webs so dense with symbols, it's hard to tell where one note ends and another begins. But if you listened, not just read, but felt, you'd start to hear the chord inside the chaos. You set a circle, you choose a day, you wait for the hour when the planet you need is watching. You gather your metals, your stones, your oils. You don't guess, you study, you listen. You pick what resonates, not what looks right, but what rings, because it all rings if you're quiet enough. Talismans, sigils, chants, candles, they're not props, they're copper wires in a sacred circuit. Get it right and the current runs straight through you. Get it wrong and nothing hums. A spell for love in a Venus hour, not just because it's tradition, but because that's when the field is softest, most willing. That's when the moon leans in close and opens the gate. You light the candle, you speak the name, and something opens, not because you forced it, because you remembered how to sing in its key, and the space sings with you if you build it right. The room itself becomes an instrument. 4 quarters, 4 limbs of the world, earth to the north, air to the east, fire to the south, water to the west. That old shape isn't arbitrary. It's a compass for the subtle body. It tells the spirits where to enter, where to rest, where to go. It tells your own field where to settle. You lay the circle, not just for safety, but for tuning. You become the center of something ancient and electric, the axis mundi, the middle point between the above and the below, between breath and star, between want and becoming. Each direction gets its color, its tool, its weight. A stone in the north, a feather in the east, a lit flame in the south, a bowl of water in the west, or oils, or incense, or sigils, scrawled in chalk, whatever speaks that element's language to you. The point isn't tradition, the point is tone. If you're calling Jupiter, you face east. That's the air quarter, the place of speech, of expansion, of wind-carried blessing. You lay a green cloth, oak leaves, if you have them, jasmine flowers, maybe, frankincense in the burner. Not because a book told you to, but because when you light that incense, something in the air relaxes, opens, listens. Saturn asks for black, for quiet, for cold. You set the altar to the North Earth's silence, stone's time. You bring iron, dark cloth, thick incense, smoke. You don't smile when you work with Saturn. You don't rush, you match its gravity. That's how you get heard. Every object you place is a note, a wire in the circuit, a frequency added to the field. It's not decoration, it's architecture. Symbol becomes structure, structure becomes signal, and that signal reaches farther than your voice ever could. Red for Mars, white for the moon, gold for the sun. You know the colors, not because they look pretty, but because they ring something in you. And when your inner chord matches the outer shape, the field catches fire. There's a reason the altar sits at the center. It's the heart, the threshold, the place where the divine can enter and not be distorted. The geometry matters. North, south, east, west. Those aren't just directions, they're doors. You're not setting up props, you're building a speaker for the soul. And when you step into the circle, you step into a song already in progress. You just have to know how to harmonize. That's what a sigil is. A harmony, frozen in shape, a chord made visible, not a symbol to think about, an engine to touch, a pocket of will that hums when the right hand holds it. You don't draw it because it's pretty, you draw it because it works, because something invisible becomes traceable when you shape it right. You tune yourself like a wire, and the wire remembers the sound it was made to carry. You start with the idea, not vague want, not a hope, something exact, something your whole body can agree on. Al-Kindi said the image begins inside. Agrippa made it clear. What you imagine with Phos, you invoke. You don't just picture the thing, you build it in the air. Then you shape the sigil. You pick your moment, planetary hour, aligned moon, clean field. You pick your material, copper for Venus, silver for the moon, iron for Mars. You pick your breath, your oil, your light. Every choice is a layer in the current. Maybe it's a Mercury piece. You want to open your voice. You want to think clearer, move swifter, hear sharper. So you wait for a Mercury hour on a Mercury day. You make it in silver. You trace the Mercury glyph and the caduceus. Maybe add some Hebrew letters or an angelic name that carries the right pulse. Lavender smoke rises while you speak over it. You whisper the name into it like it's a seed. You look at it like you love it. You breathe into it like fire to coal. And when it answers back, when you feel that tiny silent click, you know it's not just a thing anymore. It's lit. Agrippa said, "The image depends on the act of will." That's the secret. Nobody can fake. You can copy every shape, every symbol, every word from 100 books and still make nothing. Because it's not the image that makes the current, it's the charge you give it. You place it inside a larger layout, candles in planetary order, tools at the quarters, colors and stones laid like notes in a chord. Spiral, square, radial, it doesn't matter. As long as the pattern rings, the field begins to shimmer. You feel it before you see it. And that sigil, small as it is, becomes the eye of the storm. You don't force results. You don't command the universe. You tune yourself like an instrument and let resonance do the rest. Because magic isn't made by muscle, it's made by alignment. The more precise the echo, the more powerful the return.